And we hadn't talked about the elephant in the room. And so somebody needs to talk about the elephant in the room. And there are people right now, there are two different kinds of grassroots. You're in touch with one, I'm in touch with the other. There's a grassroots that's very happy about Trump, and there's a grassroots that's actually very afraid. I've heard from Muslim parents all day, afraid to send their daughters to school with their hijabs on. I've talked to Latino families all day, afraid that they're going to be sent out of the country tomorrow. And so somebody had to speak to that pain, and I was proud to do it.
As a Trump supporter, how would you respond?
I think I'm in the community as well, and I'm getting emails and texts from people saying, as an African American, I am proud to say that I voted for Donald Trump. I have friends that are Mexican Americans who said, you know what, I didn't really like the rhetoric that he used, but he's our president now, so we have to move forward. I think what Mr. Trump tapped into, not necessarily this two Americas, but it's the fact that there are a lot of Americans who feel left behind. These are African Americans. These are white Americans in Appalachia. These are the people in the Rust Belt who feel left behind by the system and have been failed by Washington, D.C. Mr. Trump spoke directly to them, and I think the results last night showed that he tapped into that. That's why he got 8% of the African American vote, when many said he'd get 0. That's why, despite all of the rhetoric that came about with respect to Hispanics and Mexicans in the wall, he got 29%, which was better than Mitt Romney did. I think he tapped into a universal cry for help, for change, and for something to make America great again, and the American people responded.
The country is divided. I think this is the perfect example of seeing that. People are hurt, people are elated, and then, of course, to your point about kids, and we just had that conversation with Dana Bash, you know, I mean, little girls have been crying. They thought Hillary Clinton was going to do it. You're an auntie. How do we talk to the young ones, and how do we bridge this awful divide?
Well, look, first of all, I think it's important to say when you're wrong, so I do want to just say I was wrong.
The second person to sit in that seat
and
saying
I think it's important to say that, and I think it's important to say, like, we need to listen a little more.
Yes.
Maybe, you know,
yes.
And so I think, you know, we have relied on, frankly, a political system that has worked. You know, I've been analyzing elections since 2004, and pretty much every time the polls have borne out the way we thought they were going to. They didn't this time, but there were a lot of people who were saying they weren't going to, and I wasn't listening to them. So I just need to say that. You know, and I think that, you know, what Van's talking about is a very real thing. I mean, you know, a lot of my friends are in a lot of pain right now. So I think that is something that Donald Trump needs to address. But we also need to be realistic about the fact that there are a lot of white people that are in a lot of pain as well. A lot of white men in particular. I mean, we know that they are suffering more from prescription drug addiction and more suicide and those kinds of things. So I think we need to take that seriously. But we also have to recognize that part of what is driving this is sort of a nostalgia vote. And so you have a lot of white voters that are very uncomfortable with
What do you mean by that?
They're uncomfortable with the way the country is changing. Gay marriage, black president. I'm not suggesting they're homophobic or that they hate black people. That's not what I'm saying. There's been a lot of, you know, studies on the evangelical white vote, for example, that they really weren't voting obviously for somebody who was a strong Christian. They were voting for somebody who said, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to the way it used to be, back when you were dominant and you didn't have to compete with other people. And so that's another thing that I think is going to have to be addressed.
I want to come to you, Mike, but you're shaking your head. Why?
I'm shaking my head because when he says make America great again, there was no time reference to that. There was a time when my grandfather, who's no longer with us, he was able to put his children through college. He was able to give them a down payment for their home and pay for their first car. My mother wasn't able to do that for me. I've had to work for everything that I've ever received in my life. And so there's a time in a lot of Americans' lives. Look, there are more African Americans owned homes during the Great Depression than they own now. So there's a time period when America was great for you. So it's personal. And so for many Americans, many African Americans, that could have been a couple years ago. That could have been 20 years ago. But the narrative that this is somehow bringing us back to slavery or bringing us back to when. Well, that's what the narrative was.
No, it actually isn't.
No, that's not saying what you just said.
Okay,
but that was
not really
definitely
what anybody's saying.
Well,
I mean, the person that I'm citing.
When you talk about KKK values, what Tim Kaine
I
talked
never
about,
said KKK values.
When
I don't.
Tim Kaine said that.
I know, but we're trying to have like an actual conversation.
Well, it's not an actual conversation.
He's not trying to have that.
Yeah, I mean,
no, Van, don't say that. I am having an actual conversation because people are trying to say.
You're talking over her.
It's not. I mean,
you talk over people all the time.
The person I'm actually there's a person, Robert Jones. He studies the religious voters, and he studied the evangelical white vote, and he wrote a book called The End of White Christian America. This is the person I'm talking about, who is not anti-Christian, he's not anti-white, he's a white man, who has said, you know, in talking to these voters, that they have basically decided no longer are they going to say character matters, or, you know, that you need to be a Christian, that they basically want somebody that's going to restore their place in the country as being the dominant culture.
I'm listening to all of this, and Mike Shields, I'm reaching over to you. Whose party is this now? Is it Donald Trump's party?
Look, I think that's a good transition for what I was going to say here. Look, I have a great deal of respect for Van. I think what he said last night was identifying an element of the election, right? There's a lot of racial splits when you look at the demographics who voted, although Donald Trump did much better with Hispanics, especially in Florida, than I think a lot of people would have predicted. But I think what we have to be careful, you're talking about how we bring people together, is not to, it's okay to talk about these specific segments and elements, but not to paint with a broad brush, right? There were some Republicans after Barack Obama got elected that wanted to say he was a socialist. And look at these elements in the Democrat Party, and we can pick this element out, and they said that, and there's a lot of that that's going on. There are millions of Americans who do not fit the definition of what's being talked about here who voted for Donald Trump. There's Republican activists who were out. They had a tremendous ground game at the RNC, tremendous, beat the Democrats on the ground at the RNC, staffed by Republican volunteers who do not fit the definition of wanting to deport Muslims or being a racist or a white lash or whatever you want to call it. These are Republican voters. And so I think you have to be, if you want to bring people together, we've got to stop painting with a broad brush and start really, you can analyze these things, but let's not call a whole party a certain name based upon certain things that certain people have said. I think that's the first. If you want to bring people, if you don't want to bring people together, we just want to fight. Then we got to keep doing that.
We want to come together.
I think let me just say a couple things. First of all, I think I'm the only national Democrat that said from the beginning that Donald Trump was real and could win. After Brexit, I think I'm the only national Democrat that went on and said, listen, this guy is real and can win. I think I'm the only national Democrat that in the middle of the campaign was going into battleground and sitting down with Trump voters in their homes, breaking bread and talking, trying to find common ground. So common ground can be identified, but we have to be able to speak honestly. And when you have a candidate who on the one hand, it's like, I agree with you, it's almost like an ink blot test. If you say, make America great again, and different people interpret it different ways. But part of the responsibility of leadership is to take responsibility for people who may be alarmed and to reassure them. And there's very little reassurance.
I think Republicans have been honest. I work at a Republican super PAC. We said from day one, you know what, there's things about Republicans running for Congress that are different from our nominee. One thing you did not see in the Democrat Party was a really honest conversation about how terrible a candidate Hillary Clinton was and how devastating she was being to their party.
Really?
You didn't see a lot of that. Then more credit to you. On this and many things, your Democrat friends should listen to you more, because you didn't hear that from the Democrat establishment. You don't hear it now. You don't hear it today.
There was a massive fight in the Democratic primary between Democrats who didn't think Hillary Clinton was the best candidate. I mean, I don't.
Or honest and trustworthy.
My party's divided, country's divided.
You know, you are now in a very different position than you were 24 hours ago. And for at least the next 4, if not the next 40 years, you're going to be in a different position. And my request to you is you are in a position to be that bridge builder. It's hard for us to do what he said. He said, don't paint with a broad brush. They didn't show my whole statement. I said, in part, it was a white lash. I gave credit to the fact last night that it was also a rebellion against elites. It was also a revolution when it comes to polling, et cetera. And it was, in part, a racial issue and a white lash. If you guys only say, no, our party is 100% pure of any of that stuff, and then Democrats say we are 100% pure of any elitism, we're never going to get anywhere. I will tell you, my party is rife with elitism. Our establishment led us into a blind alley. I've said it before, during, and after. I need a partner on your side who's also willing to admit there might be at least one person in the Republican Party who's motivated by some racial animus.
I want to hear you quickly respond to that, and then we have to go.
Yeah.
I appreciate you admitting the faults.
I think the media has incorrectly tried to pigeonhole the
But this
Republican
is not
Party.
us talking about the media. I'm giving you free airtime.
And I will tell you this, fragile communities are hurting all across this country. And there are many Republicans that are African American, that are white, that are Hispanic, that are hurting. Mr. Trump spoke to that cause. There are Republicans, there are elements of the Republican Party that do not ascribe to some of the things that I would hold dear to my heart as being a Reagan Republican or a Lincoln Republican. But that's not the whole party. I think when you see the many people who came out to vote for him that look like me, that look like you, that might be Democrats, they said, aside from all that, we believe and we want change.
Okay, my 2 takeaways listening to this whole conversation, we all need a mirror. We all need to take a good long look at ourselves